Hello everyone. In this video I would like to share with you a really interesting story that illustrates the importance of interventions. As we know, my project STEM Life is about educational interventions and how they are important if we want to eliminate the achievement gap in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, in STEM education. But this story illustrates the importance of interventions, but I'm using medical history as an example of the importance of interventions. This story starts in 1888 when the 20th President of the United States, President Garfield, was struck by an assassin's bullet in DC. The bullet went through his back, his big muscles at the back of his body, and then went into his body, and the bullet lodged in his abdomen. But fortunately, the bullet did not destroy any of his vital organs. So the doctors came, of course, to the assistance of the president. And the doctor, the physician who was in charge of helping the president, was a doctor called, his first name was actually Doctor. So he was Dr. Willard Bliss. Remember that name, because that's also, by the way, the president, the doctor who attended to President Lincoln when he was assassinated in 1865. Anyway, but this was now in 1888 when this happened, when the assassin's bullet struck President Garfield. So the doctors came, Dr. Bliss and all the other doctors did the same thing. They came to the president's side, and then they were poking their unwashed hands, their unwashed fingers into the bullet wound, trying to locate and pry out the bullet. But they couldn't get the bullet out. But all of them came in there with the dirty fingers, unwashed hands, coming straight off their horses, put the fingers into the wound. And what they were doing, of course, was that they were infecting the president. And the president, when he eventually died, did not die from the bullet wound, but died because of the severe infection that the doctors had put into his body, the pathogens, the bacteria that the doctors had introduced into his body. In fact, the President Howard Markle, he's a professor of history at the University of Michigan. The words that he used to describe what these doctors did to President Garfield are the words brutal, assault, and torture. That is what they're introducing pathogens, bacteria into his body. That's how he describes what these doctors did to the president. Now, that was the president of the United States. Now, just imagine the treatment that ordinary people were getting during those years. Now, the important question to ask is, were these doctors using the best knowledge available to them? Were there no interventions that they could have used? And the sad story is that no, there were actually interventions available that could have saved the president's life. And I will tell you now briefly about those interventions. In 1847, that was 41 years before President Garfield was struck by assassin's bullet. It was 41 years earlier. A doctor by the name of Samuel Weiss. Try and remember that name because we are all probably alive still today because of the intervention, the simple intervention that Dr. Samuel Weiss had advocated for as early as 1847. Samuel Weiss was in charge of the obstetrics and gynecology department at what is called the Wiener Allgemeines Krankenhaus in Vienna. That was just German for the Vienna General Hospital. He was in charge of the obstetrics and gynecology, taking care of mothers who came in to give birth to their children. And what he was concerned about was the very high mortality rate, death rate among mothers. And the thing that he noticed was that when the mothers were attended to by the doctors and the medical students, the death rate of the mothers was 3 times higher than when the mothers were attended by the midwives. And he thought about what could possibly be the reason. And then he noticed that when the doctors and the medical students came to attend to the mothers, they were coming straight from the anatomy lab where they were working with cadavers. And he concluded that perhaps the medical students and the doctors were bringing in something. He did not know what, because at that time we did not know about germs and that kind of thing. So they were bringing something from the anatomy labs and then coming to attend to the mothers who were giving birth. And he said, and he thought that might be the reason. So Samuel Weiss then advocated and demanded that all the doctors wash their hands before they touch a patient. Just those 3 words. Professor Howard Markle tells us that those 3 words are probably responsible, or largely responsible, for the fact that while the death rate in the year 1900, the average life expectancy of humans in the year 1900 was about 47 years. That was the life expectancy in the 1900. And the life expectancy today is almost 78 years. And according to Dr. Markle and other historians of medicine, they will tell you that it's probably largely due to that simple intervention that Dr. Samuel Weiss had advocated. Doctors, wash your hands. If the doctors who were attending to President Garfield had done the simple thing of washing their hands, right, President Garfield might probably not have died. And the interesting thing is that the same Dr. Bliss, Dr. Willard Bliss, who attended to President Garfield, is the same doctor who also attended to President Lincoln when Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. Now, in the case of President Lincoln, he probably would have died because he was shot in the head. But what those doctors did, putting in their dirty hands into the wound, by doing that, what they did was they just made his death very painful and very agonizing, because when your entire body is overcome with bacteria, that's called sepsis. It's a very agony-filled death, and that's what they did. So President Lincoln would probably have died, but in the case of President Garfield, because the bullet did not do a lot of damage, they would have saved his life with this simple intervention of washing their hands. Now, in 1847, when Samuel Weiss advocated the washing of hands by the doctors, he just knew that it worked, because after the doctors in his department did that, the mortality rate went down. The maternal mortality rates went down. But at that time, in 1847, we did not know what exactly it was that the doctors were introducing. And it was only, and it started in 1861. Then Louis Pasteur Louis Pasteur came up with the idea that when you heat milk to a certain temperature and then cool it down to preserve it, you actually get the milk to last longer before it goes bad. So there was something that we are getting rid of by washing our hands and by heating milk up to a certain temperature, and that process, as you call it, is called pasteurization. We still do it to this day. That was in 1861. And so we were starting to get an idea of there were things that were causing the infection, that were causing the high mortality rates. And then in 1867, then another medical doctor, Dr. Joseph Lister, you know him very well too. Listerine comes from his name, Joseph Lister. He is the one that came up with what we today call the germ theory of disease. The whole idea that disease and infections that kill humans and cause disease, that those organisms are actually the things that we should avoid. So when doctors wash their hands, they're killing off most of the germs, so their hands are not as filled with pathogens as they would otherwise be. So the point is that when those doctors were torturing and brutally assaulting President Garfield by putting their dirty hands into his body, this knowledge was available to them. In fact, in 1876, Joseph Lister came to the United States to give lectures to doctors, and his work in 1867 had been published in the medical journal The Lancet. I'm still trying to find out why that knowledge that Lister had discovered in England, I'm still trying to find out why that knowledge had not been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, because the New England Journal of Medicine was started in 1812. So why is it that the doctors, the high-level doctors who were attending to the president, why is it that they did not know about washing hands, that they did not know about the germ theory, right, that could have saved the president's life? So the point there is that when interventions are available and those interventions are not used, it really can create a lot of very big problems. Now, in the next video, I'm going to tell you how this applies to education interventions, and I will demonstrate in the next video that a lot of interventions are available, but they are not being used. So the problem continues. We've been struggling with the problem of the achievement gap for over 70 years, and we have made very little progress in closing the gap. And my interest is in that gap with respect to science. And my point, I submit to you that we have intervention principles that's been around for over 100 years. I will show you next time. And we are not using it. So the problems continue. And Dr. Garfield, President Garfield, died a death of agony and pain and suffering. And he died getting treatment that is described as brutal, an assault and torture, because people had interventions available to them, but those doctors were not using those interventions. And we will see how the same thing applies to education. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk again. Bye.